Our next session will focus on P3s and will be presented by Executive Vice Chancellor Steve Rellier. Steve, please begin.
Thank you, Chair Kimball. Good afternoon. Today's panel presentation will provide an in-depth look at public-private partnerships, commonly referred to as P3s. What we'll do is describe what they are, how they're structured, and how we use P3s to help achieve the educational mission of CSU. Joining me on the panel today are Robert Eaton, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Financing, Treasury, and Risk Management, Vi San Juan, Assistant Vice Chancellor for Capital Planning, Design, and Construction, Don Theodora, Assistant Vice Chancellor and Chief Counsel for Business and Finance, and President Soraya Coley, Cal Poly Pomona, President Lynn Mahoney of San Francisco State, and President Saul Jimenez Sandoval of Fresno State. So great group of people joining us today. And before I turn it over to this panel, let me begin with just a brief description of what P3s are. Public-private partnerships can be defined in lots of different ways, but for the university, when we talk about P3s, particularly in the context of the trustees' role in reviewing and approving these projects, we're generally talking about a method by which the university might develop a capital project. So in the case of a P3, the elements of a capital project development are handled by, for the most part, a third-party developer partner. The typical structure calls for a sponsoring entity, and in our case, it's either a campus or an auxiliary to a campus, that entity to lease a portion of its land over for a long period of time to a third-party development partner who then develops the capital project on that land. The projects vary quite a bit in complexity and in structure. And I should note that P3s can also involve a partnership with another public agency, so not necessarily a private partner. In other words, a public-public partnership. And the CSU has entered into a lot of these, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So I'm going to start off with Robert Eaton. And Robert, I know that there are 5 key elements of a P3 project. Could you just run through what those are and how they work?
Sure, Steve, and good afternoon, trustees. When it comes to utilizing a P3 structure, a development method, I think it can be useful to think of capital projects generally as the result of 5 core elements. We design the project, we build it, we finance it, we operate it, and we maintain it. And it's through each of these elements that we evaluate the risks and the benefits of a particular project. Now, as you know, when the CSU is comfortable with a project, with the risk-reward trade-off of a particular project, we will design, build, finance, operate, and maintain it with our own resources. Sometimes, however, we may find it is to our advantage to shift the development of a capital project to a third party. Now, in this case, the third party now assumes responsibility for designing, building, financing, operating, and maintaining the project. And usually they will assume responsibility for all 5 elements, but this is not always the case, and we may choose to retain one or more of these elements for ourselves. For example, we may choose to retain the financing component of a project because we can do so at a lower cost than the developer. Or we may choose to retain the operation of a project because of the quality of our staff. Whichever of these elements are shifted to a third party, it's important to remember that with the responsibility and the risk for a given element moving to a third party, that third party developer will also be compensated accordingly. That is, there will be more return for the third party and less return for the CSU.
Thanks, Robert. So as Robert's just shared, a P3 can vary in its structure depending on the project and how it fits with the campus need. Now, this slide illustrates the various types of P3 projects that are currently in operation at the CSU. In the first presentation, Nathan Evans told you there would not be a quiz, but I made no such promise. So there is a quiz. And you're not allowed to look at the material that we sent out to you earlier, but I am going to ask you a couple of questions, a very short quiz. And this is just to get your response and what you think, but let's start with And I think what Justin has done is opened up the chat so that you can use this to respond. So this is my first question. When you look at this slide and these kinds of P3 projects, what would you guess are the projects currently in operation at CSU? Now, Chancellor Castro, in his opening remarks, told you that we have about 30 that are in development or under consideration. But I'm asking you a very different question. How many do you guess would be in operation at CSU? So I'll pause a moment. And now I'm going to reveal the answer, or someone in the control booth will reveal the answer. It is 54. So I don't know if that was less or more than you were thinking, but actually I know when we added all these up, I think a lot of us were surprised it's that many. And they're in all of these different types. Okay, so I told you this is a 2-question exam. The next question is, when you look at these projects, what would be your guess as the most prevalent category? What do we do more than anything else in terms of P3s of the categories that you're looking at? I'm going to give you a moment to think about it. Okay, are you ready? I'm going to ask our booth. There you go. Look at that. Energy and by far, as you can see. And that's it for the quiz. That's all the hard work that you have to do for this afternoon. Now, since energy is such a major player in the number of P3s, I'm going to ask Vi San Juan to talk about these energy projects. And what are we doing here, Vi?
Thank you, Steve. Good afternoon, trustees. So Steve, these are primarily solar generating public-private partnerships where the P3 is responsible to design, build, finance, operate, and maintain the solar panels. Most recently, we've been adding battery storage to these agreements, and the campus purchases the energy from the private entity. So with the board's goal to increase our solar power generation, we have worked on these agreements to make them more accessible and functional for the campuses, to streamline the process. And from the 30 plus projects that are in development, more than 14 of them are looking at additional solar generation. So more to come.
Okay, well, thank you, Vi. And as you can tell from this chart, the next most popular or prevalent P3 at CSU are these mixed-use projects. You know, examples include offices, buildings, business, retail space, hotel projects, and the like. Now, as you can also see, we've got high schools, transit, laboratories, and other projects on this slide, and those are typically public-public partnership projects. So an example is the joint library partnership between the city of San Jose and San Jose State. That's where the city's main library and the campus library were completely integrated to promote capital and operating efficiencies for both entities. Now I'm going to turn it over to our panelist, President Soraya Coley, who's going to talk briefly about a very exciting P3 project at Cal Poly Pomona, which is the Innovation Village Research Park. President Coley?
Yes, thank you so much, Steve, and good afternoon, trustees and Chancellor Castro. The Innovation Village Research Park is a result of a partnership with the Trammell Crow Company and is now home to the American Red Cross, Southern California Edison, and the Center for Training and Technology Incubation, or we say CTTI, which includes 9 other companies. And the primary focus has been to attract research and development organizations interested in partnering with the university to complement as well as to enhance our university programs. These are very strong partnerships that have evolved at Innovation Village, and I am most proud of the number of students that are employed or participate in internships with these companies. And revenues from the ground leases are also critical to our successful efforts to support students through scholarships and other student activities. Thank you, Steve.
And thank you, President Coley. Very exciting stuff. And as you can see from the types of P3 projects we have across the CSU system, there are numerous advantages for using this kind of structure. For a number of years, we've emphasized the need to diversify our revenue streams. We've talked about this at board meetings quite a bit. And President Coley just shared a good example of a P3 that has created a stream of revenue that can be used to meet campus educational needs and support our students. Even if the project being considered is one that we can develop ourselves, we might utilize a P3 structure so that we can focus on our core mission and doing what we do best. Now, the Mission Valley development at San Diego State, which you've received a number of reports over the last couple of years, while very early in its development, will take extensive advantage of private sector expertise, resources, and efficiencies, and will also transfer significant risk to our private partners. And sometimes a unique opportunity may present itself to a campus that also requires P3 structure. So, for example, Cal State LA has a partnership now with the LA Football Club, which is a major league soccer franchise in the Los Angeles area. And it's a good example of this kind of opportunity. So next, I'm going to turn to President Lynn Mahoney, San Francisco State University, who's going to share the highlights of a P3 partnership at San Francisco State. President Mahoney?
Thank you, Steve, and good afternoon, trustees. In May 2017, the board approved a P3 mixed-use student housing and retail project that we now call Manzanita Square. The partner, American Campus Communities, is responsible for all 5 core elements of the P3 project. The project provides over 500 undergraduate students with much needed housing, minimizes reliance on private automobiles, and furthers the university's commitment to sustainability. The project provides student housing on a previously underutilized acre of campus land and transformed it into a high-density, mixed-use residential project at a key campus entry point. This project illustrates the importance of a strong partnership. We opened last fall in the middle of a pandemic, and in the spirit of working together, San Francisco State and American Campus Communities made adjustments to deal with market volatility, changes in demand, and all the uncertainties we faced. We look forward to this fall semester and seeing Manzanita Square full of students. I'll turn this back to you, Steve.
Thank you, President Mahoney. So that was just a great example. And what we're going to do now is shift gears and have a conversation about the process that we use to plan, evaluate, and implement these P3 projects. And I'm going to ask Robert and Vi and Dawn Theodora to join me in talking about this process that we have been using for quite some time. So all P3 partnerships begin with the concept, right? What is it? And Vi, I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about the considerations that go into the concept phase of a project.
Sure. Thank you, Steve. One of the key considerations for the campus is what will the educational benefit be of the proposed P3? And what are the desired outcomes from the partnership? Is it that we'll use the land better on the campus? Is there an academic program partner that would benefit the students in some manner? Is there a market demand for housing, whether it's student housing or faculty staff housing, to address an unmet need in the locale? So the types of projects vary that you've seen, the complexity varies. The energy projects are fairly straightforward, so those have been easier to implement more of those types of projects. But the key is that the concept is the board approves the concept before it goes further. So those are the key items that the campuses consider, Steve.
Great, thanks, Vi. And obviously they're critical considerations in making the best decisions on behalf of the university and the state. Now, let's spend a couple minutes talking about financial considerations. That's obviously a very important part. Robert, when you and your team and the campus conduct a financial analysis of a proposed P3 project, what are some of the key areas you focus on as you're doing your due diligence?
Sure. So we'll work with the campus. We'll actually start very early in the process, doing some financial analysis, kind of understanding what we might want to get out of the project financially and so forth. But the real heart of what our financial analysis entails takes place once we've received proposals from prospective partners. That follows the RFP process. Because now, in this case, we have actual numbers and actual structures that we can analyze and kind of dig into the numbers, and also compare proposals, one partner, prospective partner versus another. And so some of the key things we'll look at the ground lease, the ground rent structure. What's the amount of the ground rent? What's the timing of those ground rent payments? The structure, the form that they will take. Will they be a percentage of the gross revenues? Will we take some of the percentage of the net, maybe participate in some of the upside? If there's any what we call capital events, if there's a refinancing that pulls money out of the project, will we participate in that, and so forth. Again, all this is designed to make sure that we're getting the right return for the fair market value of the land that we're turning over to this third party. And I should also note that, as you know, a lot of these projects will have non-monetary benefits. For example, the opportunity for internships and scholarships for students. And we will factor those non-monetary benefits into our analysis. We'll also look at the capital structure. Is the proposed partner looking to finance it with 100% debt, which adds more risk, or are they bringing equity into it? And if it's equity, is it their own equity, or are they bringing another equity partner into it? So we'll look at that. We will certainly take a close look at the projected revenues and expenses of the project to see how viable is it. Are those assumptions realistic? And we'll weigh that and test that as well. We'll also look at, depending on the structure, will it have an impact on the CSU's system-wide revenue bond credit rating? Or will the structure mean that, say, any debt or obligation that's part of the project going to be on our balance sheet? For many years, these projects were kind of sold along the lines of, don't worry, it won't affect your credit rating and it won't be on your balance sheet. But we've seen that that's not always the case. So we do look closely at that. All of this, again, is just part of a review to make sure that we're understanding the right risk-return balance for the CSU and the partner, make sure there's an appropriate trade-off there for us.
Thanks, Robert. Obviously, the work that your team and campuses perform in this phase is very essential in guiding future decision-making about whether to go forward with the project. Now, as you can tell from this chart, the next thing is identifying partners. How do we do that? What are some of the key considerations? I'm going to turn to you, Vi, to talk about that a bit.
Sure. There are several ways to identify a partner, and most often we use a competitive process for the selection. There would be a request for qualifications and a request for proposal that the campus prepares and issues out for developers to respond to. In other cases, it will be an opportunity that has arisen, say, with an interested charter school wanting to be on campus, or forensics lab that wants to partner with the campus. And then the example, Steve, you provided with the San Jose Library. So the city was the willing partner in that partnership. So it does really depend. And with certain projects, if it's multiple phases of a project, if there's a fair amount of land, you may have multiple partners across a P3 development. So it does vary based on the type of project and the outcomes that the campus is looking for.
Oh, thanks, Vi. So clearly the selection of a partner is absolutely key and could be one of the major drivers of whether the project will be viewed as a success. Vi, I know another big factor here in California is the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. can you just talk us through some of the key considerations without getting into too much of the detail, but some of the key considerations of CEQA?
Sure. With the presentation last month, there was a lot of detail on CEQA. So for a P3, one of the key considerations for the campus is, does the campus perform the CEQA and hire the consultants for the analysis, or does the developer? That would impact the cost, out-of-pocket amount of money for the campus, and the schedule for the project, depending on who does what. The second item are the public comments that come out from the process. Are there items that the community is concerned about, local agencies? And then the third that occurs is the identification of environmental impacts through the CEQA process. And then who is responsible to implement the mitigation measures? What are the cost of those mitigation measures? And how is the project structured to cover those costs? And then finally, as part of the key consideration for CEQA is, before the development agreement can be approved, the board has to certify the CEQA documents and approve the documents. So that's the key item. The project won't be able to move forward unless the board approves certifies the CEQA documents.
Yeah, that's very helpful. Very complex, though, I know. And I sure appreciate the work of your team working with the Office of General Counsel and others to navigate through the complex CEQA stuff. Let's talk about project implementation. Vi, could you walk us through the design and build phase of these projects? What are the key milestones there?
The key item, typically the board would provide final approval of the project, and then design would start. It sometimes occurs that the P3 will start design before the final agreement, but that's at their own risk. But typically the board approves the final terms and conditions, and then the next time the board would see the project is at the schematic approval phase. So those drawings come forward to the board. And then the P3 is responsible for complying with the building code, energy requirements, and seismic requirements of the CSU. And the risk transfer in this phase is the schedule maintenance by the contractor and managing the design and construction risks. So right now we're hitting a lot of construction cost escalation. So a P3 developer would be responsible to manage that cost impact to the project. And then once it's completed during the term of the project, the campus is responsible to ensure the developer is complying with the terms of the agreement.
Okay, very good. Thanks, Vi. So I know you all see Robert and Vi and myself at board meetings all the time. A person that you don't see as much is Dawn Theodora, who I'm going to ask to talk a little bit about these projects from her standpoint. Dawn is actually part of Andy Jones' team, but I really think of her as part of our team when it comes to evaluating these P3 projects. So, and by the way, Dawn is outstanding. And Dawn, I want to ask, when we approach negotiations and contracting with P3 developers, how does that differ from non-P3 projects? Are they different? Are they significantly different?
Yes, thank you, first of all, for those kind remarks, Steve, and good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you all. There are a few differences. There can be some misunderstanding amongst our P3 developers regarding CSU's sovereign authority over its land and projects, especially with respect to these transformative projects. Developing and constructing a university campus, whether through a P3 or not, is a fundamental government activity assigned exclusively to CSU by the state. So when operating in this capacity, CSU's projects are generally exempt from local regulations, ordinances, policies, permitting, fees, and taxation, unless the state legislature expressly says so by way of a specific statutory allowance or exception. This distinction is new for many, if not most, private developers who are accustomed to obtaining approvals from and complying with city and county rules and fees and permitting, which do not apply to the CSU. The contractual negotiations and final legal documents with the selected development partners are also complex and they can be lengthy. There may be historical deed restrictions, covenants that run with the land, specific use restrictions imposed by the campus or the chancellor's office, hazardous waste and materials risks and indemnities, pending litigation, and a multitude of other legal details that must be addressed in the project agreements. Consistency of terminology, which is part of my job here, terms and conditions, and a comprehensive legal approach impacts all of these issues. From the concept stage through RFP, through CEQA review, the ground leases and the development agreements, and through project completion. While there are some terms and conditions that are template-based, there will always be unique legal issues to navigate and to memorialize in the P3 documents and agreements.
Very helpful, Dawn. Thank you. Another big question that I hear frequently from a lot of folks is whether or not prevailing wage rates apply to these public-private developments. How would you address that?
Carefully. Prevailing wage analysis is very complex and very fact-specific and should always be determined on a project-by-project basis. No two projects are alike, and there's no blanket one-size-fits-all approach. Prevailing wage applies to public works projects, which is defined in the code as construction, alteration, demolition, installation, or repair work that is, one, done under contract, which is how we do all of our work, and two, that is paid for in whole or in part by public funds. This definition is interpreted very broadly by courts and by the Department of Industrial Relations. So, for example, if the underlying ground lease rent is not based on the appraised fair market value of the land and is for a lesser amount, the difference is considered payment of public funds towards the project, and prevailing wage will apply. Additionally, if CSU's public funds are used for pre-construction costs, infrastructure, utilities, and similar aspects of the project, then prevailing wage will apply unless the CSU is fully reimbursed by the private developer for those costs. Of course, as with most things legal, there are many exceptions and nuances that we don't have time to cover here today.
Great, thanks, Dawn. Appreciate that insight, and it's clear that these projects each need to be evaluated separately and very thoughtfully. So if we could go back to that process slide, you can see there's a lot of work that goes into this. And on the bottom of the slide, you see that there are three critical points at which the board is involved in these projects. Board approves concept, the CEQA and final project approval, and then the schematic design. As these projects vary so much in their type and complexity, we need to develop resources for the campuses to make their job easier and doable. And I'm going to ask Vi again, can you talk a little bit about the tools that we make available to assist campuses as they're going through this evaluation process?
Sure. The CBDC's website, if you go to the next slide, now includes a project center to assist campuses with capital projects. You may need to click, there you go. The website includes a project center in the middle there that includes P3s as one of the project types. The site identifies the stages of a project and contains materials and tools to help campuses navigate the various areas of getting to the board for approval and consideration and implementation. For example, in stage one, the concept development, the site identifies the need for educational benefits, potential feasibility studies for the project, and provides access to system-wide agreements for appraisers, financial advisors, and should the campus elect to use them. So we continue to identify ways to improve the process and help the campuses navigate P3s, and invite the board to visit our website and see what you think of as far as the details there and resources available.
Thanks very much, Vi. So, going back to our earlier quiz, when we asked about what you thought might be the most prevalent project at CSU, it was clearly energy projects by a long shot. And I'm going to ask President Jimenez Sandoval of Fresno State to share with us a P3 development that takes energy projects to a whole new level that we have not had in the CSU. So, President Jimenez Sandoval, I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Thank you very much, Steve, and good afternoon, Chancellor Castro, Board of Trustees, and colleagues as well. As the board may recall, Fresno State pursued the Central Utility Plant Replacement Project to improve reliability of the utility infrastructure that serves campus buildings. I should say that the Central Utility Plant was originally built in 1954. Our P3 partners are Meridian Infrastructure North America Corporation and Noresco. While the project is early in the process, the interactions with the P3 team have gone well, with the projected completion date in 2024. In the project, the P3 is providing the design, build, finance, and maintenance as well. Fresno State is committed to continuing to operate our central plant with our campus team of building engineers and trade staff. And through this project delivery, we will ensure that they are provided with the necessary training and support. The Meridian Agreement also includes an opportunities programs to support and enhance a more sustainable campus and environment while providing hands-on experiences for our students. The program will include internship and scholarship opportunities, as well as professional development opportunities for our faculty and our staff. I want to thank Chancellor Castro, who spearheaded this when he was president of Fresno State. And thank you, Steve. Back to you.
Okay, thank you, President Jimenez Sandoval. So, trustees, as you can see, we have quite a mix of public-private partnerships. Each of these partnerships serves a very unique purpose and brings very unique benefits to the campus, to its staff and students, and in many cases to the surrounding community. Each project is carefully considered and reviewed by the Chancellor's Office staff and campus experts before coming to the board for concept approval and then eventually development approval. We also continually try to achieve process efficiencies by expanding available guidance and tools to assist our campuses. So for CSU to continue to provide California students with an affordable, high-quality education, we are rarely provided the resources we need from the state. So whenever we can, we try to use, and I use three initials, OPM, whenever possible. OPM is a horrible acronym which stands for other people's money. So in other words, we must continually be creative in leveraging our assets and our expertise to bring additional resources to our campuses. So we've covered a lot of material. We thank you for allowing us to spend this time with you. I want to thank our panelists, Vi San Juan, Robert Eaton, Don Theodora, and President Coley, President Mahoney, and President Jimenez Sandoval. We're all available to answer any questions you might have. Thank you. Let's see, I've got first Trustee Furstenberg, and then after Trustee Furstenberg, Trustee Sebelius.
Okay, let me ask some very naive questions here. The CSU is a very large system. We have, I think, 59 projects. Would you say we have been, have we done these with appropriate, not only appropriate due diligence, but with appropriate energy? Should we be doing more? Should we be doing less? Is it, how much should these be generated by the campuses in the first instance, by the Chancellor's office as you have described? I know it's hard, Steve, for you to answer this because you're in the middle of it, but sort of give me a sense of where you think we are and where you think we can go if there is an opportunity to really develop this further.
Great questions, hard questions, but they are the key questions. So thank you, Trustee Furstenberg. Let me first start with, where do they come, who's identifying these projects. And by the way, any of the panelists who want to jump in, please jump in at any time. They come, I'd say, primarily from the campuses, but sometimes they come from the system. And sometimes we see something at the system happening at one campus, and we see an opportunity at another campus and then talk to that campus about it. So oftentimes we're acting as a facilitator. That's one of the reasons why I showed you that website that they put a lot of work in to be, to the extent we can. I was almost going to call it a cookbook, but it's hard. These projects are so different. It's hard to call it a cookbook, but it's as many of the tools as necessary. Now, just for an example, the Fresno State utility project is a gigantic, very important project. And I call it important not just from the standpoint of giving Fresno State the appropriate infrastructure to continue to grow and have reliability for its classrooms and its research, but also it's important as a demonstration project for the rest of the system. Because it may, if this thing goes as we think it's going to go, then it creates a new template or a new model. Because we do have other infrastructure issues, as many of the trustees know, as you visited the campuses, at other campuses. So that approach, and maybe based on that experience, a tweaked version of that approach might work really well somewhere else. Another part of your question was, are we doing too much or too little? That's a really good question. I think we ask ourselves this almost weekly. I think we can always do more. I guess that would be my answer, is that it seems like we're doing a lot. When I came to CSU 7 years ago, I think we brought about one of these to every other board meeting. And now we typically bring multiple ones to each board meeting. So we're ramping up the volume of these quite a bit. And I think, the presidents more and more, and their cabinets are spending a lot of time just exploring, well, what if we found a partner to do this thing? And the vice presidents for business and finance on the campuses meet constantly together. Every other week they meet together. And one of the things they talk about are experiences with these projects and what can we make portable from one campus to the other. Are there any other panelists that want to chime in on that?
Steve, if I can add something to that. As I mentioned before, the central plant was originally built in 1954. So it's 67, 68 years old. In our case, when Chancellor Castro was president here, we were very aware that the underground infrastructure and the central plant equipment had clearly exceeded their useful life. And that failure was a constant threat to all of us. At that point, we knew that the magnitude of this construction could not be borne by the campus nor by the system. Clearly, with a total cost of $170 million, the P3 was clearly the way out, the very clear solution to this. So I think in that case, we were also able to see the payoff. The payoff is a 32% reduction of energy, which will yield on an annual basis between $1.5 and $2 million as we move through this, which will, we will be responsible for paying, I believe, $10.5 million each year. But then on the long run, I think it'll be very beneficial to Fresno State. So to your question, I think if it's a major ticket item, I think it's very beneficial to begin these conversations with P3s for the benefit of the campus.
And I'd just like to add that, there are going to be a number of different drivers for campuses to pursue these. But I know at Cal Poly Pomona, for example, we have really looked at how P3s help to enhance learning. That it is not, that while there are also other revenue streams available for the campus, there's a benefit for the community. It also benefits the learning experience. We have faculty who are working on research projects with some of the companies that are part of the P3. As mentioned, we have student internships, and a portion of those students ultimately get jobs. And so we have begun to see the P3 as a way of extending learning opportunities for our students.
Thanks, President Coley. Trustee Sebelius, and then Trustee Adamson.
Yes, thank you. Your presentation was very lucid and clear. However, I still cannot wrap my head around where the exact border lies when one development becomes a P3. And I want to give you 3 quick recent examples, and maybe that can illustrate where it's clear to me and where it's not. Recently, the Board of Trustees approved some housing project at Sacramento State, where the campus provides the land, but a private company designs, builds, finances, operates, and maintains the complex, and they reap the profits from the students' rent. And after 60 or so years, the building returns to the campus. I think that's clearly a P3, a private-public partnership. When Sonoma bought faculty housing, that complex was not primarily designed for us. It was designed and built, and Sonoma bought it, and now it operates and maintains it. Now, I assume that is not a P3 because we simply bought an entity and it belongs to the campus right now. At San Jose State.
Oh, Romy, you're on mute now. You can just unmute yourself.
Yeah, sorry, it happened automatically. I don't know. Do I talk too much? Was my time limit up? At San Jose State, there's a theater that belongs to the city next to campus. So it was built and designed, not for us, but we operate and maintain it right now. However, we didn't buy it. Now, where does that fall? Is that a P3, a public-public partnership? I'm not clear where the line is drawn. And then I'm also confused with the definition of auxiliaries. What if a campus has a food hall and there's Panda Express and whatever, Denny's and so on and so on? Then they maintain and operate the business. They partially finance it, but we designed and built whatever that food court. I do not really understand the fine line of the distinctions. And then also to the question of whether we have enough or too little. That depends entirely on the campus, I would say. And to give, again, 2 examples of 2 nearby campuses, Monterey Bay and San Jose State. San Jose State is locked up in a city. We have very, very small footprint and land is scarce. We need to get land from somewhere else, and we're getting land from, I think, the state of California, where we build some faculty and graduate student housing. On the other hand, Monterey Bay has plenty of land that could be leveraged in order to create such development. So it really depends. Not every campus has the same possibilities and potentials to engage in these kind of partnerships.
Thank you, Trustee Sebelius. Really good questions. And so let me start. And again, I'll ask any of our panelists who want to add their thoughts to please do so. So first of all, don't be worried if you see some gray area between what could be viewed as clearly a P3 and what could be viewed as clearly not a P3, because there, in fact, is some gray area there. So you can be comfortable in that feeling that there's some gray area. Secondly, I would say, when I think of a P3, it goes back to what Robert Eaton was saying at the very beginning of this presentation. I think of it almost like 5 Lego blocks. And 1 block is design, 1 block is build, 1 block is finance, 1's operate, and 1's maintain. Those 5 blocks can be arranged in almost any combination. You could do, if all 5 are done by us, by the university, that's clearly not a P3. If we give all 5 to someone else, that clearly is a P3. So if someone else, a third party, is coming up with the money and building it and operating it and financing it and maintaining it, doing all that stuff, clearly a P3. But the interesting thing about this model is that all of these things are interchangeable, and you shouldn't look at them as being static or following a format. So you might do, say, 2 of those things on the university side and 3 of those things on the partner side, and you would still call that a P3. So, for example, oftentimes in a project, we'll start out thinking, okay, this partner is going to do all 5. But then Robert Eaton swoops in and says, now, wait a minute. We just did an analysis. They're financing it, and they're going to do an interest rate of 5.7% throughout this life of this project. We're going to grab that piece of it, and we're going to do the financing for 3.2%. We're going to save tens of millions of dollars through the life of this project. So we've just taken out one of the 5 building blocks out of that model. So I don't know if that helps a bit, but you're right, there is some gray area, and it's really, taking those 5 Lego pieces or building blocks and arranging them in a way that maximizes the benefit to the university and its campuses. And to the extent we can, oftentimes we want to push risk to the partner, not to us. And another comment you made, I'll comment on now, just open it up to any of the other panelists that want to comment on this. But you mentioned about, one of our key assets that we get to leverage in these partnerships is our land. And clearly you are right. Not all campuses have the same opportunities when it comes to available land. You've got, a campus like San Diego State, which is essentially landlocked. I don't think they have a square inch of available land that they can do something with without tearing something else down. So what they had to do is, jump 3 trolley stops to another part of San Diego and acquire that land and then do some of these P3 partnerships. But you're absolutely right. A campus like Monterey Bay will have a lot more opportunity because they have that available land. Now, we talk mostly about those kind of projects. There are P3 projects where land is not really the essential component. It could be, for example, you're very familiar with the San Jose library situation. That's not necessarily one where the campus was leveraging land that it had. That was more of a public. Cal State LA has a great partnership with LA County in forensics and teaching, having LA County people like in the sheriff's office and others teaching students how to do forensics. And there's an exchange that goes back and forth between the students as interns and the county employees donating their expertise. So they come in a lot of shapes and forms. And I think the main thing is, look at these elements separately and then critically look at each one. And then what is the optimal way of combining these things together where we get a win and the development partner gets a win. Any of the panelists want to add to that?
Yep, Steve, if I may, just to add to your information, for the San Jose Theater and some of our food service entities, and amount of the difference is the length of the term. And I can't recall the specifics, say, for the San Jose Theater, but I'm believing that the campus may just be leasing that, even if it's a $0 or $1 a year lease, and then is able to use the facility. But that would what we've tried to do with P3s, if it's a long term, especially 10, 20, 30, 60 years, that's where it'd be presented more as a P3. So I'm guessing that the lease with the city is not as long a duration. And the other item you mentioned with Sonoma, you're correct that the apartment was just a purchase. It would have been different if we had contracted with a private entity ahead of time, asked them to build it, and had some agreement in how the operation and maintenance would occur. So for that one, it is not a P3, but it could have been. There's a project that we had developed at San Bernardino for student housing, where it was an agreement with a private entity prior to construction, worked with them hand in hand through the design. They went through our permitting process, our plan review process, And then there was an option in the agreement that we could purchase it if we so elected it after construction. And we ultimately did end up doing that. So there's some prevailing wage issues that kicked in after that as far as a court issue. But that was a model that we felt was very successful. And now we have to treat it a little bit differently because of some of the fact-based considerations with prevailing wage. But I'm hoping that helps. And maybe with the auxiliaries, I think those are shorter term leases, say for a Carl's Jr. on campus. So I would say it's more of a lease situation, but I would defer to Dawn if she has anything she would add on that.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Vi. The food court type relationships typically and generally are shorter term leases or license agreements that we enter into with food service folks, either through the university or through auxiliaries on the enterprise side.
Thank you, that helps. And Steve, feel free to use San Jose State as a landlocked campus with very little space. We had to move a historic house 2 times over the last 15 years in order to make space for, most recently, our science building. I think we have the smallest footprint of a campus, maybe even smaller than Maritime Academy at San Jose State, because we are right in downtown.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Thank you, Trustee Sebelius. Trustee Adamson.
Thanks, Steve. Well, after Trustee Sebelius's lengthy dissertation, I almost forgot my question. But mine's a really quick and simple question. You have a concept phase. You say majority, if not all, start at the campus level. So my question is, are we known in the developer world and in their environment? And do they come to us and look and bring ideas to us? Or is this only a one-way street? It's only when we bring a concept to them.
A great question, and it really happens both ways. Oftentimes, someone will approach either the system office or a campus. As Vi San Juan mentioned in some of her discussion, oftentimes we will, if we find a partner that we think is really good, what we'll do is develop a master enabling agreement, which is essentially a kind of a pre-cooked partnership that becomes portable to any campus and they don't then have to go through the negotiations, and we don't have to go through the legal review, and we don't have to do a lot of this stuff. It could be kind of a fast track way of doing this. So we are pretty well known. There are, as you can imagine, there are conferences on everything, right? And there are a lot of conferences where national conferences, and some here on the West Coast, where P3 potential partners particularly who like working with universities will come, and then universities will come and we'll send people there. And then we'll talk about, what are opportunities there. A lot of times it is a contact that one of our presidents has with, say, an alum who is just, in love with the campus, credits the campus with a lot of their success, and they want to get involved with the campus, and they might own a business and might say, hey, is there something we can do together? And sometimes they start that way. So it really is a multiple avenues. Any of the panelists want to add to that?
Steve, I can add a comment. As Steve noted, a lot of it develops on the campus, and those developers, they'll see an opportunity near a campus, a piece of land, and so they'll look at it and then they'll contact the campus. But over the years, these developers, by and large, have also established relationships with us in the chancellor's office, because they'll keep us apprised as well as to what they're doing. And that benefits everybody, right? Because we see multiple projects around the system. So if a developer has an opportunity at, say, Campus X, we'll encourage them to talk with Campus X and see if they're interested. But we can also advise them on what has worked in the past, what we've seen in the past. And that way people don't get out over their skis, whether it's the developer, the campus, or us. So by and large, it is initiated at the campus, because ultimately it's the campus that's going to benefit. They understand what their needs are best and what the opportunities are there. But they keep this chancellor's office informed.
I would add that one of the project types that we've seen where the developer is approaching us is student housing, and one developer in particular at multiple campus sites. So they have pursued a project near a campus and then want to team with us in some manner. So I think that's happened at least at 4 campuses with one developer.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because if we come up with a concept that could be applicable to multiple campuses, we should be able to share that and as a system be able to benefit from it. My last comment is that I am very pleased that the concept of learning by doing is kind of part of the way you evaluate the true value of these proposals and our ability to open up opportunities for our students for engagement, I think is important. So I applaud you for including that in your evaluation.
Thank you. President Jimenez Sandoval.
Thank you, Steve. I have an idea that just came to mind in that it's sort of like building something with Legos. I might have Legos of different sizes and shapes, but then somebody else has other Legos that I need in order to construct a project or an idea that I have in mind. And then I go to the other person, and I think this goes to Trustee Sebelius' question as well. And I say to that person, I have these pieces, and you will put the other pieces. In Fresno State's case, the P3 provided the design, the building, the financing, and also the maintenance, but we are going to operate the central plant. In other cases, then it would be that I have the idea, and then I go to somebody else and I say, we will provide the design and we will provide the building and the operating, but then you will finance and you will also maintain the project as well. So I think it goes back to also the second question, which was, if I have the idea, it is up to me within the campus then to start exploring this, of course, with the chancellor, in order to come up with a concept that or partnership that will be the best case scenario for the campus, for the system as well. So sometimes I will provide certain Lego pieces, the others will provide other Lego pieces, but at the end, we will both go towards building that one project that is going to be beneficial for the campus as well.
I think it's really a great way of characterizing the different variations of this. And, you know, another interesting outcome sometimes of these is that, and this goes again, I think, to the question of where these things start from. Sometimes we'll develop a partnership between a campus and a private entity. And it just so happens that the partnership goes really well, and that private entity has its own partnerships with others. Sometimes they then draw that group in. So an example is, I'll go back to Cal State LA and this partnership with the LA Football Club. The LA Football Club, and that partnership has been very strong and has been a huge benefit to the campus in terms of student scholarships, in terms of supporting their housing, their athletic programs. But the LA Football Club had a close relationship with Delta Airlines, and Delta Airlines and the campus then started talking about ways that they could partner together. So sometimes these things will snowball and it will open up other doors that we weren't really anticipating at the beginning of the process. Any other questions or any other comments from any of the panelists? Well, if not, thank you very much for taking the time with us today.
Thank you.
I want to thank again all of the presenters for what was an extremely engaging and informative webinar. Thanks also to my colleagues on the board for your characteristic enthusiasm and thoughtful questions. Your active participation today greatly enriched this afternoon's event. I hope you found it to be helpful and that you agree with me that events such as this will help us to better serve the CSU and our talented and diverse students. This now concludes the Board of Trustees Informational Professional Development Webinar. The board will reconvene for our next regularly scheduled meeting on July 13th and 14th, 2021. Notice of the meeting will go out in the ordinary due course 10 days in advance of the meeting. Thank you all.